We need to
Lieutenant
act
Sarah
now. There's no more
Martinez
time for
stepped off the
hesitation. I
transport
need every one of you
helicopter
committed. Our
onto the
mission
dusty
depends on it.
tarmac of Forward Operating
Soldiers, the
Base
moment is
Thunder,
now. We move with
her
precision.
boots hitting
Yes,
the
ma'am.
ground
Standing
with
by.
determination that had carried
Gear
her
up.
through
We
8
deploy in
years of
5.
military service. The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the sprawling base in Afghanistan, where concrete barriers and razor wire created a fortress in the middle of nowhere. She adjusted her tactical vest and grabbed her duffel bag, knowing that this assignment would be different from anything she had experienced before. Sarah was not just any officer. At 27, she had already distinguished herself as one of the Navy's most capable intelligence analysts, specializing in counter-terrorism operations. Her record was spotless, her recommendations glowing, and her strategic mind had helped save countless lives during her previous deployments. But none of that seemed to matter as she walked across the base, feeling the weight of curious stares from the predominantly male personnel. The base commander, Captain Rebecca Stone, had specifically requested Sarah's transfer to Thunder Base. The operation they were running required someone with her unique skill set in data analysis and tactical planning. Sarah had been briefed extensively during her journey, learning about the complex network of insurgent activities they were tracking in the region. The mission was critical, and failure was not an option. As Sarah made her way to the command center, she passed groups of soldiers engaged in various activities. Some were cleaning weapons, others were participating in physical training, and a few were gathered around vehicles performing maintenance. The atmosphere was tense but professional, as it always was in forward operating bases where danger lurked beyond the perimeter walls. The administrative building was a stark concrete structure that housed the base's nerve center. Inside, the air conditioning provided blessed relief from the oppressive heat outside. Sarah reported to the duty officer, presenting her orders and identification. The young corpsman behind the desk processed her paperwork efficiently, but she could sense his surprise at seeing a female lieutenant arriving for what was clearly a high-level assignment. While waiting to meet with Captain Stone, Sarah observed the bustling activity around her. Radio chatter filled the air as communications personnel coordinated with units in the field. Maps covered the walls, marked with colored pins indicating various operational areas. Computer screens displayed real-time intelligence feeds, and the urgency of their mission was palpable in every conversation and movement. Captain Stone emerged from her office, a woman in her mid-40s, with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much combat. She greeted Sarah with a firm handshake and a knowing smile. Stone had fought her own battles to reach her current position and recognized the challenges that female officers faced in combat environments. She had specifically requested Sarah because she needed someone who could not only analyze data but also navigate the complex social dynamics of a forward base. During their private briefing, Stone explained the delicate situation they faced. Intelligence indicated that a major attack was being planned against coalition forces in the region, but the details remained frustratingly elusive. Sarah's job would be to piece together fragments of intercepted communications, analyze behavioral patterns, and identify potential targets before the insurgents could strike. The work would require long hours in front of computer screens, cross-referencing databases, and collaborating with field operatives. Stone also warned Sarah about some of the challenges she might face. While most of the personnel on the base were professional and respectful, there were always a few individuals who questioned whether women belonged in combat zones. Stone had dealt with these attitudes throughout her career and had developed strategies for handling them effectively. She advised Sarah to focus on her work, prove her value through results, and never let anyone make her feel like she did not belong. After the briefing, Sarah was assigned to her quarters, a small room in the officer's housing unit that she would share with another female officer who was currently on patrol. The space was Spartan but functional, with 2 narrow beds, a small desk, and a locker for personal belongings. She quickly unpacked her essentials and prepared to report to the intelligence center where she would spend most of her time. The intelligence center was located in the most secure part of the base, protected by multiple layers of security and staffed around the clock. Sarah was introduced to her team, a mix of military personnel and civilian contractors who specialized in various aspects of intelligence gathering and analysis. They welcomed her warmly, clearly relieved to have someone with her experience and expertise joining their operation. Her immediate supervisor, Major Williams, was a career intelligence officer who had spent the better part of 2 decades tracking terrorist networks across the Middle East. He briefed Sarah on their current operations, showing her the massive database they had compiled over months of surveillance and intelligence gathering. The information was overwhelming in its scope, but Sarah's trained eye immediately began identifying patterns and connections that others had missed. As evening approached, Sarah made her way to the dining facility for her first meal on the base. The mess hall was crowded with personnel from various units, creating a cacophony of conversations, laughter, and the clatter of utensils against metal trays. She grabbed a tray and moved through the serving line, accepting portions of what appeared to be some variation of military standard fare. Finding an empty table in a corner, Sarah sat down to eat and observe her new environment. The social dynamics of the base were fascinating to someone trained in behavioral analysis. Groups naturally formed along unit lines, with special operations personnel clustering together, regular infantry maintaining their own circles, and support staff creating their own informal networks. She noted how conversations flowed, who held informal leadership roles, and how information seemed to travel through unofficial channels. It was during this observation that she first noticed the table of Navy SEALs in the far corner of the mess hall. Even in a base full of elite military personnel, the SEALs carried themselves with a distinctive confidence that set them apart from everyone else. They were part of a joint task force operating from the base, conducting high-risk missions that required their specialized training and capabilities. The SEAL team had been on the base for several weeks, and they had developed a reputation for their effectiveness in the field, as well as their somewhat arrogant attitude off-duty. Most of the base personnel respected their skills while keeping their distance from their abrasive personalities. The team was led by Petty Officer First Class Jake Morrison, a veteran operator with multiple deployments and an ego that matched his impressive service record. Morrison had joined the Navy straight out of high school, driven by a desire to prove himself and serve his country. SEAL training had been the defining experience of his life, forging him into a warrior capable of operating in the most dangerous environments on Earth. Over the years, he had participated in dozens of classified operations, earning commendations for his bravery and tactical expertise. However, success had also bred a certain arrogance and a belief that civilians and non-combat personnel could never truly understand the sacrifices and skills required of elite operators. As Sarah finished her meal and prepared to leave, she noticed Morrison's eyes following her movement. There was something in his expression that suggested he was already forming opinions about the new female officer, though they had never spoken. She had encountered similar looks throughout her career and had learned to ignore them, focusing instead on proving her worth through her performance rather than engaging in unnecessary confrontations. The next morning, Sarah reported to the intelligence center before dawn, eager to begin her analysis of the accumulated data. The center was quieter in the early hours, with only the night shift personnel monitoring communications and updating databases. She settled at her assigned workstation, a powerful computer system connected to classified networks that would give her access to intelligence from across the region. As she began reviewing the intercepted communications from the past month, Sarah's analytical mind started processing patterns that others had missed. Her training had taught her to look beyond the obvious, to identify subtle connections and anomalies that might reveal larger operational plans. The insurgents were clearly planning something significant, but their communications were fragmented and coded in ways that made direct interpretation difficult. Hours passed as Sarah worked through the data, creating charts and diagrams that helped visualize the relationships between different intercepted communications. She began to see how various seemingly unrelated conversations might actually be part of a coordinated effort. Geographic references, timing patterns, and recurring phrases started forming a picture of something much larger than anyone had initially suspected. By mid-morning, other intelligence personnel began arriving for their shifts, and Sarah found herself explaining her preliminary findings to Major Williams. He was impressed by the connection she had identified in such a short time and encouraged her to continue developing her analysis. The potential implications of what she was discovering could affect not just their base, but coalition operations throughout the region. As word of Sarah's progress spread through the intelligence community on the base, it eventually reached Captain Stone, who called for an immediate briefing. Sarah presented her findings to the base's senior staff, explaining how the intercepted communications suggested a coordinated attack planned against multiple targets. Her analysis indicated that the insurgents had been conducting surveillance of coalition bases and supply routes for weeks, gathering intelligence for what appeared to be a simultaneous strike designed to maximize casualties and disruption. The briefing room fell silent as the implications of Sarah's analysis became clear. If her interpretation was correct, they were facing a threat unlike anything they had encountered in the region. Captain Stone immediately ordered increased security measures and began coordinating with higher headquarters to share the intelligence and request additional support. Sarah's work had potentially prevented a catastrophic attack, but her job was far from over. The respect that Sarah had earned through her analytical work was evident in how the base's senior leadership treated her recommendations. However, not everyone on the base was equally impressed by her contributions. Some personnel, particularly those who had never worked directly with intelligence analysis, failed to understand the significance of what she had accomplished. They saw only a female officer who spent her time at computer screens rather than in direct combat operations. This disconnect between the value of Sarah's work and the perception of some base personnel would soon create tensions that Captain Stone would have to address. The base was a small community where respect was earned through proven performance, but different groups valued different types of contributions. While the intelligence community recognized Sarah's exceptional abilities, others measured worth by different standards entirely. As Sarah continued her analysis over the following days, she began developing detailed profiles of the insurgent network they were tracking. Her work revealed a sophisticated organization with cells operating across a wide geographic area, coordinating their activities through a complex communications network that had previously gone undetected. The scope of the threat was far greater than anyone had imagined, and Sarah's ability to uncover these connections was proving invaluable to the entire coalition effort. The intensity of her work meant long hours in the intelligence center, often extending well into the evening. Sarah rarely took breaks, driven by the knowledge that lives depended on her ability to stay ahead of the insurgent planning. Her dedication did not go unnoticed by her colleagues, who began seeking her input on other cases and requesting her assistance with their own analytical challenges. However, the more prominent Sarah's role became within the intelligence community, the more she stood out among the broader base population. Her presence at high-level briefings and her direct access to senior leadership created visibility that would eventually lead to the confrontation that would define her time at Forward Operating Base Thunder. The stage was being set for a conflict that would test not only Sarah's professional abilities but also her personal resilience in the face of institutional prejudice. The confrontation that would change everything began on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon when Sarah was returning from a classified briefing with coalition intelligence officers. She had spent the morning presenting her latest findings about the insurgent network, which had grown even more concerning over the past week. Her analysis had revealed that the planned attacks were imminent, possibly within the next 72 hours, and she carried with her updated threat assessments that would require immediate action from all units on the base. As she walked across the central compound, her mind was focused on the operational implications of what she had discovered. The insurgents had been conducting detailed surveillance of their supply convoys, and Sarah had identified specific patterns that suggested they knew about scheduled movements that should have been classified information. This raised the disturbing possibility of a security breach somewhere in the chain of command, adding another layer of complexity to an already dangerous situation. The SEAL team was conducting equipment maintenance in the shade of a supply building when Sarah passed by. Morrison and his teammates were cleaning weapons and checking gear, preparing for a mission that would take them outside the wire that evening. The work was methodical and professional, but the conversation was typical of soldiers trying to maintain morale in a stressful environment through humor and casual banter. Morrison noticed Sarah approaching and made a comment to his teammates that was intended to be overheard. His voice carried the casual arrogance that had become his trademark among the base personnel, and his words were designed to establish his perceived superiority over what he considered to be non-combat personnel. The comment was not particularly creative or original, but it was loaded with implications about gender roles and military hierarchy that immediately created tension in the area. Sarah heard the comment clearly, as Morrison had intended, but her initial reaction was to continue walking without acknowledgement. She had encountered similar attitudes throughout her military career and had learned that engaging with every provocative comment was neither productive nor worth her time. Her focus remained on the critical intelligence work that demanded her attention, and she had no interest in petty confrontations with personnel who clearly did not understand the nature of her contributions to the mission. However, Morrison was not content to let the moment pass. Emboldened by what he perceived as Sarah's unwillingness to confront him, he made a second comment that was more direct and specifically targeted her rank and position. This time his words carried a clear challenge, questioning not just her presence on the base but her qualifications to hold her current position. The comment was loud enough to attract the attention of other personnel in the area, creating a public spectacle that Sarah could no longer ignore. The situation escalated when Morrison made a particularly offensive remark about female officers in combat zones, suggesting that they were more of a liability than an asset, and that their presence endangered the lives of real soldiers. His words were calculated to provoke a reaction, and they carried the weight of assumptions and prejudices that had plagued military culture for decades. The comment was not only disrespectful to Sarah personally, but also undermined the contributions of all female service members serving in dangerous assignments around the world. Sarah stopped walking and turned to face Morrison directly. Her military training had taught her to maintain composure under pressure, but her personal integrity would not allow such comments to go unchallenged. She approached the group of SEALs with measured steps, her posture straight, and her expression controlled. The other personnel in the area sensed that something significant was about to happen, and work activities gradually slowed as attention focused on the developing confrontation. When Sarah spoke, her voice was calm and professional, but it carried an authority that surprised Morrison and his teammates. She addressed his comments directly, explaining that his assumptions about her role and qualifications were based on ignorance rather than facts. She outlined her military experience, her educational background, and her current responsibilities in language that made it clear she was not intimidated by his attempts to diminish her standing. Morrison's response revealed the depth of his prejudices and his unwillingness to acknowledge that he might be wrong about female officers in general and Sarah in particular. He doubled down on his original position, making additional comments that were even more offensive and inappropriate. His teammates shifted uncomfortably, realizing that the situation was escalating beyond casual banter into something that could have serious consequences for everyone involved. The confrontation attracted more attention as base personnel stopped their activities to observe what was happening. Word began spreading through informal communication networks that there was a major dispute between a female intelligence officer and one of the SEAL team members. Some personnel moved closer to get a better view, while others maintained their distance but continued to monitor the situation from afar. Sarah's response to Morrison's escalation was measured but firm. She explained that his attitude was not only unprofessional, but also detrimental to unit cohesion and mission effectiveness. She pointed out that military operations in modern conflicts required diverse skills and expertise, and that successful missions depended on cooperation between personnel with different specializations, rather than outdated notions of hierarchy based on gender or military occupational specialty. Morrison's reaction revealed his inability to accept that a female officer might possess skills and knowledge that exceeded his own. His comments became increasingly personal and inappropriate, attacking not just Sarah's military qualifications, but also making disparaging remarks about her appearance and presumed motivations for serving in a combat zone. His words crossed lines that should never be crossed in professional military environments, and his teammates began to distance themselves from his increasingly volatile behavior. The situation reached a critical point when Morrison made a comment that questioned Sarah's courage and suggested that she would be unable to perform under pressure when lives were at stake. This attack on her character and professional competence was particularly galling, given her extensive record of service and her current role in protecting the lives of everyone on the base through her intelligence work. The comment demonstrated Morrison's complete ignorance of her contributions and his unwillingness to acknowledge facts that contradicted his prejudices. Sarah's response was precise and devastating. She calmly recited Morrison's service record, which she had access to through her intelligence clearance, and compared it to her own in terms of deployments, commendations, and operational contributions. Her analysis made it clear that while Morrison was certainly a skilled operator, his experience was limited to direct action missions, while her own background encompassed a broader range of military specialties and leadership positions. The comparison was particularly effective because it was delivered without emotion or personal attacks. Sarah simply presented facts in a manner that demonstrated the weakness of Morrison's assumptions and the strength of her own qualifications. Her approach highlighted the difference between professional competence and playground bullying, making Morrison's behavior appear even more inappropriate by contrast. Morrison's teammates began to recognize that their leader had made a serious mistake in challenging someone whose credentials clearly exceeded his expectations. They had assumed, based on his confidence and his history of successful operations, that he knew what he was talking about when he made disparaging comments about female officers. However, Sarah's calm demolition of his arguments made it clear that his prejudices had led him to make assumptions that were both wrong and professionally damaging. The crowd that had gathered to watch the confrontation was witnessing something unprecedented on the base. Female personnel rarely had the opportunity or the platform to directly challenge the attitudes and behaviors that they faced on a daily basis. Sarah's willingness to confront Morrison publicly and her ability to do so effectively was inspiring to some observers and threatening to others who shared similar prejudices. As word of the confrontation spread throughout the base, it reached the ears of senior leadership who were monitoring the situation through unofficial channels. Captain Stone was in her office when her aide informed her of the developing situation, and she immediately recognized the potential implications for unit cohesion and base security. The last thing they needed during a critical operational period was a major morale incident that could distract personnel from their mission focus. Stone dispatched her command sergeant major to assess the situation and determine whether immediate intervention was necessary. The sergeant major was a veteran of multiple deployments who had seen every type of personality conflict and disciplinary issue that could arise in a military environment. His initial report indicated that the situation was serious but still contained, with both parties maintaining military bearing despite the heated exchange. Meanwhile, the confrontation continued as Morrison struggled to regain the upper hand in an argument that he was clearly losing. His responses became increasingly desperate and inappropriate, as he realized that his usual tactics were ineffective against someone who was better informed, more articulate, and more professional than he had expected. His frustration was evident to everyone watching, and his behavior was becoming a source of embarrassment to his own team. Sarah maintained her composure throughout the escalation, refusing to be drawn into the emotional responses that Morrison was clearly trying to provoke. Her training in intelligence analysis had taught her to remain objective under pressure, and her experience as a female officer in a male-dominated environment had given her extensive practice in dealing with hostile attitudes without losing her professional bearing. The confrontation was drawing attention from across the base as personnel found excuses to move through the area or position themselves where they could observe what was happening. Many had never seen anyone challenge Morrison so effectively, and the novelty of the situation was creating a crowd that made the incident impossible to contain quietly. The public nature of the dispute meant that whatever resolution occurred would be witnessed by a significant portion of the base population. Morrison's final comments before the situation was interrupted revealed the full extent of his prejudices and his inability to accept that his assumptions about female officers were wrong. He made statements that were not only inappropriate but also potentially actionable under military justice regulations regarding discrimination and hostile work environment. His words crossed lines that military leadership could not ignore, regardless of his operational record or his team's mission requirements. The tension in the area was palpable as personnel waited to see how the situation would resolve itself. Some hoped that cooler heads would prevail and that both parties would find a way to de-escalate without further incident. Others sensed that something fundamental was happening that would have lasting implications for how female personnel were treated on the base and throughout the broader military community. Sarah's response to Morrison's most offensive comments would have been entirely justified and within her rights as a military officer. But before she could speak, an authoritative voice cut through the tension like a knife. Captain Stone had arrived on the scene, having decided that the situation required immediate command intervention to prevent it from escalating further. Her presence immediately changed the dynamics of the confrontation and signaled to everyone present that senior leadership was taking the incident seriously. The captain's arrival marked the end of the direct confrontation between Sarah and Morrison, but it also set the stage for consequences that neither of them had fully anticipated. The public nature of the incident meant that it could not be resolved quietly through unofficial channels, and the inappropriate nature of Morrison's comments meant that formal action would be required to maintain good order and discipline on the base. Captain Stone's arrival at the scene immediately transformed the atmosphere from a heated personal confrontation into a formal military situation requiring official attention. Her presence commanded instant respect from all personnel in the area, and the crowd that had gathered to watch the dispute quickly dispersed as soldiers returned to their assigned duties. However, the captain had heard enough of the exchange to understand that this was not a simple disagreement that could be resolved with a few words of caution. Stone's first action was to separate the two primary participants, directing Sarah to report to her office immediately, while instructing Morrison to remain in place until she could address him separately. Her tone was measured but carried the unmistakable authority of command, making it clear that she viewed the incident as a serious breach of military professionalism that would require formal investigation and appropriate consequences. As Sarah walked toward the command building, she reflected on what had just occurred and the potential implications for her career and mission effectiveness. She had not sought the confrontation, but she also had no regrets about defending herself against Morrison's inappropriate comments. Her military training and personal integrity had required her to respond professionally to behavior that was clearly unacceptable in any military environment. Inside the command building, Sarah waited in the outer office while Captain Stone completed her initial assessment of the incident with her senior staff. The captain was gathering information from multiple sources, including eyewitness accounts from personnel who had observed the confrontation and reports from her command sergeant major who had monitored the situation as it developed. The investigation was thorough and professional, reflecting Stone's commitment to understanding all aspects of what had occurred before taking action. When Sarah was finally called into the captain's office, she found herself facing not just the base commander, but also the deputy commander and the senior enlisted advisor. This level of attention indicated that the incident was being treated as a significant disciplinary matter with potential implications for unit cohesion and base security. Sarah provided a detailed account of the events, explaining both Morrison's comments and her responses in precise factual language that demonstrated her professionalism and credibility. Captain Stone's questioning was thorough but fair, focusing on the specific statements that had been made and the context in which the confrontation had developed. Sarah's answers were clear and consistent, providing a timeline of events that corroborated the accounts provided by other witnesses. Her demeanor remained professional throughout the interview, reinforcing her reputation as a competent and reliable officer. Meanwhile, Morrison was being interviewed separately by the deputy commander and the command sergeant major. His account of the incident revealed both his continued inability to acknowledge the inappropriate nature of his comments and his unwillingness to accept responsibility for escalating the situation. His responses demonstrated a pattern of thinking that was inconsistent with military values of respect, dignity, and equal treatment of all personnel, regardless of gender or military occupational specialty. The investigation revealed that Morrison's behavior was not an isolated incident, but rather part of a pattern of inappropriate comments and attitudes toward female personnel that had been overlooked or minimized by his chain of command. Several female service members came forward to report similar experiences with Morrison and his teammates, providing a broader context for understanding the significance of what had occurred during the public confrontation with Sarah. These additional reports painted a picture of a toxic environment within the SEAL team that had been allowed to persist because of their operational effectiveness and the reluctance of leadership to address cultural issues within elite units. The testimony revealed that Morrison's attitudes were not unique among his teammates, and that their behavior had created a hostile work environment for female personnel who interacted with them in professional settings. Captain Stone realized that the incident with Sarah represented an opportunity to address systemic issues that had been festering beneath the surface for months. The public nature of the confrontation meant that her response would be closely watched by all base personnel, and her actions would send a clear message about the standards of behavior expected from all service members regardless of their operational specialization or elite status. The captain's investigation also revealed the extent of Sarah's contributions to base security and mission effectiveness. Her intelligence work had identified threats that could have resulted in significant casualties among coalition forces, and her analytical capabilities had proven invaluable to ongoing operations throughout the region. The contrast between Sarah's professional contributions and Morrison's disruptive behavior made the disciplinary decisions much clearer for the command team. While the investigation was ongoing, Sarah continued her intelligence work with even greater focus and determination. She was aware that her professional performance was being scrutinized more closely than usual, and she was committed to demonstrating that the confrontation had not affected her ability to contribute effectively to the mission. Her analysis continued to provide critical insights into insurgent activities, and her recommendations were being implemented by field commanders across the region. The intelligence Sarah was developing became even more urgent as her analysis indicated that the planned insurgent attacks were imminent. Her work identified specific targets, timing, and methods that allowed coalition forces to take preemptive action to protect their personnel and assets. The operational success that resulted from her intelligence directly saved lives and prevented significant damage to military infrastructure in the region. Morrison's SEAL team was scheduled to participate in several of the operations that were based on Sarah's intelligence, creating an awkward situation where their mission success would depend directly on the analytical work of the officer their leader had publicly disparaged. This irony was not lost on the team members, who began to recognize the disconnect between Morrison's attitudes and the reality of modern military operations that required collaboration between diverse specialists. Captain Stone's decision-making process was informed by multiple factors beyond the immediate incident. She had to consider the impact on base morale, the precedent her actions would set for future disciplinary cases, and the operational requirements that demanded effective cooperation between all personnel regardless of their personal opinions or prejudices. The situation required decisive leadership that would address both the immediate disciplinary issues and the broader cultural problems they represented. The captain also had to navigate the complex politics of dealing with elite special operations personnel, who operated with considerable autonomy and whose commanders at higher levels might resist disciplinary action that could affect their operational capabilities. However, Stone's own experience as a female officer in a male-dominated military had taught her the importance of maintaining standards of conduct that protected all personnel from discrimination and harassment. After completing her investigation, Captain Stone convened a meeting with her senior staff to discuss the appropriate response to the incident. The discussion was thorough and considered multiple perspectives, including the operational impact of any disciplinary action and the precedent that would be established for future cases. The consensus was clear that Morrison's behavior had crossed lines that could not be tolerated regardless of his operational value or elite status. The captain's decision was informed by military regulations, command guidance from higher headquarters, and her own judgment about what was necessary to maintain good order and discipline on the base. She recognized that her actions would be closely scrutinized by personnel throughout the command structure and that her response would influence how similar situations were handled in the future. Before announcing her decision, Captain Stone reviewed Sarah's personnel file and service record in detail. What she discovered reinforced her understanding of the injustice that had occurred during the confrontation. Sarah's record showed consistent excellence in every assignment, numerous commendations for her analytical work, and recommendations from previous commanders that praised both her professional competence and her personal integrity. The contrast between Sarah's distinguished service record and Morrison's inappropriate behavior made the captain's decision easier, but she also recognized that the situation represented broader issues within military culture that required sustained attention rather than simply reactive disciplinary action. Her response would need to address both the immediate incident and the underlying attitudes that had allowed such behavior to persist. Captain Stone also consulted with legal advisors and equal opportunity specialists to ensure that her response would be consistent with military regulations and policy guidance regarding discrimination and harassment. The consultation process confirmed that Morrison's behavior constituted clear violations of multiple policies and that significant disciplinary action was not only justified, but required to maintain compliance with military standards. The legal review also examined Sarah's conduct during the confrontation to determine whether her responses had been appropriate and professional. The analysis confirmed that Sarah had acted within her rights as a military officer and had maintained proper military bearing throughout the incident despite significant provocation. Her responses had been measured, factual, and consistent with the standards expected of professional military personnel. As word of the ongoing investigation spread throughout the base, it became clear that the incident had created two distinct camps among the personnel. Some supported Morrison and believed that special operations personnel should be held to different standards because of their unique mission requirements and operational pressures. Others supported Sarah and viewed the incident as an opportunity to address long-standing problems with discrimination and harassment that had been ignored for too long. The division of opinion created tension throughout the base as personnel debated the appropriate balance between maintaining operational effectiveness and enforcing standards of conduct that applied equally to all service members. These discussions revealed deeper philosophical differences about military culture, gender integration, and the special status often accorded to elite units within the broader military structure. Sarah became aware of these debates, but chose to focus on her intelligence work rather than engaging in discussions about the incident or its implications. Her professionalism in avoiding the rumor mill and maintaining her focus on mission requirements earned respect from colleagues who appreciated her commitment to putting duty before personal concerns. Her approach demonstrated the kind of leadership by example that military organizations needed to address cultural challenges effectively. The intelligence Sarah continued to develop proved even more critical as the insurgent threat evolved in response to coalition countermeasures. Her ability to adapt her analysis to changing conditions and provide updated assessments kept military commanders ahead of enemy planning and prevented several potential attacks that could have resulted in significant casualties. Her work validated the captain's confidence in her abilities and reinforced the importance of maintaining professional standards that allowed all personnel to contribute effectively, regardless of gender or military specialty. The day Captain Stone chose to address the entire base about the incident dawned clear and unusually calm, as if the desert itself was holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. Word had spread through unofficial channels that the base commander would be making an important announcement regarding recent events, and personnel from all units found reasons to position themselves where they could hear what she had to say. Captain Stone had spent considerable time preparing her remarks, understanding that her words would be remembered and discussed long after the immediate incident was resolved. She needed to address not just the specific behavior that had occurred, but also the broader cultural issues that had allowed such attitudes to persist within the military community. Her message would need to be clear, authoritative, and educational without being preachy or defensive. The captain chose to make her address during the evening formation, when all available personnel would be present, and when her words would have maximum impact on base morale and culture. The timing also ensured that her message would be heard by personnel from all shifts and all units, creating a shared understanding of command expectations regarding professional conduct and mutual respect. As personnel assembled in the central compound, the atmosphere was noticeably tense. Everyone understood that something significant was about to happen, and there was considerable speculation about what the captain would say and what consequences would be announced for those involved in the incident. Some hoped for a quick resolution that would allow everyone to move on without major disruption, while others anticipated a more substantial response that would address systemic issues they had observed over time. Morrison and his SEAL teammates were present in the formation, though their body language suggested considerable discomfort with the situation they had created. The team had spent the past week operating under a cloud of uncertainty about their future assignments and the potential impact of the disciplinary investigation on their military careers. Their usual confidence had been replaced by an awareness that their elite status would not protect them from the consequences of inappropriate behavior. Sarah stood with her intelligence unit colleagues, maintaining the same professional demeanor she had displayed throughout the investigation. She had not sought the attention or notoriety that had come with the incident, but she understood that her response to Morrison's behavior had created an opportunity for positive change that extended far beyond their personal confrontation. Her presence in the formation represented not just her individual experience, but the broader challenges faced by female service members throughout the military. Captain Stone took her position in front of the assembled personnel and began speaking in the clear, authoritative voice that had commanded respect throughout her military career. Her opening remarks acknowledged the incident that had brought them together while emphasizing that the issues involved extended far beyond the specific individuals who had been directly involved in the confrontation. The captain's first major point addressed the fundamental principle that military effectiveness depends on the contributions of all personnel regardless of their gender, race, or military occupational specialty. She explained that modern military operations require diverse skills and expertise that cannot be provided by any single group or type of service member. Her words emphasized that the strength of military units comes from their ability to integrate different capabilities into cohesive teams focused on mission accomplishment. Stone then addressed the specific behavior that had precipitated the incident, making it clear that discriminatory comments and harassment would not be tolerated under any circumstances. She explained that such behavior not only violated military regulations and policy, but also undermined unit cohesion and mission effectiveness by creating hostile work environments that prevented personnel from performing at their full potential. The captain's remarks included specific examples of how discrimination and harassment affected military operations, drawing on her own experience and that of other commanders who had dealt with similar issues. She explained that personnel who were subjected to such treatment often became reluctant to contribute their ideas or expertise, resulting in missed opportunities to improve tactics, techniques, and procedures that could save lives and enhance mission success. Captain Stone also addressed the misconception that elite military units should be held to different standards of conduct because of their specialized missions or unique operational requirements. She made it clear that professional military bearing and respect for fellow service members were fundamental requirements that applied equally to all personnel regardless of their unit assignment or operational specialty. Elite status, she emphasized, should be reflected in higher standards of conduct rather than exemptions from basic military values. The captain's most powerful moment came when she specifically recognized Sarah's contributions to base security and operational success. Stone detailed how Sarah's intelligence analysis had identified threats that could have resulted in significant casualties among coalition forces, and how her work had enabled successful operations that had disrupted insurgent activities throughout the region. The recognition was specific, factual, and compelling, making it clear that Sarah's professional contributions far exceeded what most personnel on the base had realized. Stone's praise for Sarah's work was particularly effective because it was delivered in the same professional tone she used for all personnel recognition, without any suggestion that special consideration was being given because of the incident or Sarah's gender. The captain presented Sarah's achievements as examples of the kind of professional excellence that all military personnel should strive to achieve, regardless of their specific role or assignment. The captain then announced the disciplinary action that would be taken against Morrison, explaining that his behavior had violated multiple military regulations and policies regarding discrimination, harassment, and conduct unbecoming a military professional. The consequences were significant and appropriate, including formal counseling, reduction in rank, and removal from his current assignment pending further evaluation of his fitness for continued service in special operations units. Stone's announcement of Morrison's discipline was delivered in the same matter-of-fact tone she had used throughout her remarks, emphasizing that the consequences were the natural result of unprofessional behavior rather than punitive action taken because of personal animosity or political considerations. Her approach reinforced the message that military discipline was about maintaining standards rather than punishment for its own sake. The captain also announced that Morrison's entire SEAL team would undergo additional training on equal opportunity, professional military bearing, and the importance of unit cohesion in achieving mission success. This broader consequence acknowledged that the cultural problems represented by Morrison's behavior were not limited to a single individual and required sustained attention to address effectively. Captain Stone's remarks included a broader discussion of the military's ongoing evolution toward full integration and equal opportunity for all qualified personnel. She acknowledged that change was sometimes difficult and that some individuals struggled to adapt to new realities, but she made it clear that adaptation was not optional for those who chose to continue serving in the military. Her words were firm but not confrontational, offering a path forward for personnel who were willing to embrace professional standards while making it clear that those who could not or would not adapt would not be tolerated. The captain's conclusion focused on the positive aspects of the incident, emphasizing how it had created an opportunity for the entire base to reaffirm their commitment to military values and professional excellence. She praised the many personnel who had conducted themselves professionally throughout the incident and had supported their colleagues regardless of gender or military specialty. Her words recognized that the vast majority of base personnel shared the values and standards that made military service honorable and effective. Stone's final remarks challenged all personnel to be leaders in creating and maintaining an environment where every service member could contribute their full potential to mission success. She emphasized that leadership was not limited to those holding formal command positions, but was the responsibility of every individual who chose to serve their country in military uniform. Her words created a sense of shared responsibility for maintaining the standards and culture that would allow the military to continue serving effectively in an increasingly complex and challenging world. The impact of Captain Stone's remarks was immediate and profound. Personnel throughout the base understood that they had witnessed something significant that would influence military culture far beyond their small community in the Afghan desert. The captain's words had created a clear standard for professional behavior, while recognizing the contributions of all personnel who met that standard, regardless of their background or military specialty. Morrison's reaction to the captain's announcement was notably subdued, reflecting his recognition that his behavior had not only damaged his own career, but had also created problems for his teammates and his unit. The consequences he faced were serious and would follow him throughout the remainder of his military career, serving as a permanent reminder of the importance of maintaining professional standards in all circumstances. Sarah's response to the captain's recognition was characteristically professional, acknowledging the praise while maintaining her focus on the intelligence work that continued to demand her attention. She understood that the incident had created opportunities for positive change that extended far beyond her personal experience, and she was committed to demonstrating, through her continued service, that the captain's confidence in her abilities was well-founded. The broader impact of the incident and Captain Stone's response extended throughout the coalition forces operating in the region. Word of how the base had addressed discrimination and harassment spread through military networks, providing an example for other commanders who face similar challenges in maintaining unit cohesion and professional standards in diverse military communities. The incident also attracted attention from military leadership at higher levels, who recognized that Captain Stone's response had addressed important issues that affected military effectiveness throughout the chain of command. Her approach became a model for other commanders dealing with cultural challenges, demonstrating how decisive leadership could turn potentially divisive incidents into opportunities for positive organizational change. Sarah's intelligence work continued to provide critical support for coalition operations, validating Captain Stone's decision to support her and reinforcing the importance of maintaining environments where all qualified personnel could contribute effectively regardless of gender or military specialty. Her success became a powerful argument for the value of diversity and inclusion in military organizations operating in complex and challenging environments. The long-term impact of the incident extended far beyond forward operating Base Thunder, influencing military culture and policy discussions at the highest levels of military leadership. Captain Stone's response demonstrated that professional military standards could be maintained without compromising operational effectiveness, providing a roadmap for addressing similar challenges throughout the military establishment. Years later, military personnel would remember the incident as a turning point that demonstrated the importance of leadership in creating and maintaining military cultures that allowed all qualified individuals to serve with dignity and respect. Captain Stone's words that day had silenced not just Morrison's inappropriate behavior, but had also challenged an entire military community to live up to the highest standards of professional conduct and mutual respect that made military service both honorable and effective.